I'm starting this project with a modified version of the normal template. This template has a single audio track and a preview bus pre-inserted, as well as a number of custom screen sets. Sonar X1's browser is the hub for finding and adding content to a project. The browser can auto-preview files at host tempo so they play back in sync and in context with the project, and the browser can be routed to any bus in the project, so I'll route mine to the preview bus. The browser also has default content locations, which are essentially shortcuts to the content in your system. All three versions of Sonar X1 come with 500 megs of loops from Sample Magic and 500 megs of loops from Loop Masters. Preset content locations make finding these loops a breeze. I want to browse drum loops, so I'll use the context filter to find loops that only have the word drum in them. Clicking on a loop auto-previews it, and dragging it into the track view adds it to the project. Because this is a Rex file, I'll right-click on the clip and bounce it to a WAV file so I can use it with AudioSnap. Next, I'll change the edit filter's data type to audio transients. And I'll double-click in the track's empty space to make it fill out the track view. Clicking within the clip brings up the AudioSnap palette, and I'll adjust the threshold so that all transients have AudioSnap markers. And finally, clicking the Split Beats into Clips button in the AudioSnap palette will slice up the audio file at the markers, creating individual clips. And now that I'm done with AudioSnap, I'll change my edit filter back to clips. Selecting a clip and holding Shift while pressing spacebar will preview that individual clip. I'll use this clip for my kick drum, and I'll put a fade on it by grabbing the top right corner and pulling to the left. Notice the fade snaps to grid, which in this case is set to measure. Next, I'll bounce both of these to clips to apply the fades and apply trimming at the same time. Now these samples are ready to be part of a drum kit. One of the browser's default content locations is for track templates, which I'll use to add Session Drummer 3 into the project. They're organized by type, and Sonar X1 includes many different templates for Session Drummer 3. And I'll clear my search filter to see all of my Session Drummer templates, and just drag and drop it right into the project. And as you can see, all of Session Drummer's audio tracks are preloaded, configured, and ready to go. Double-clicking on any of Session Drummer's track header icons will open up the synth. And I'll switch over to the mixer page, then drag my kick sample onto the kick drum icon, and do the same with the snare. For the hi-hat, I'll right-click on the hi-hat icon, choose Load Instrument, browse to my hi-hat folder, and load one of the hi-hat SFZ modules. These modules are much more than just an individual sample. They include velocity layers, mappings, etc. I'll do the same thing for my crash and load up a crash module. And round out the kit with the ride module. This lets you use elements from different kits, including your own samples, to build a custom drum kit. And here's what the drum kit sounds like so far. So I'm going to mute my first audio track since I don't need that anymore, and switch over to Screen Set 2, which I have set up for pattern creation. Clicking on the step sequencer icon at the top of Session Drummer's interface opens the step sequencer in the multi-dock. Step sequencer is basically a grid of rows and steps that automatically maps out to Session Drummer or any other soft synth. I'm going to change this pattern to be 8 beats long, and the step sequencer pattern can also adapt to any time signature to have any number of steps per beat. I'll leave mine at 4. To get the pattern started, I'll right-click on my hi-hat row and choose to autofill every 2 steps, and then preview the pattern. Lay down a basic snare pattern, and add some kick drums. As it is now, everything is locked on timing and at the same velocity, so I'll open up my hi-hat row, and edit the MIDI velocity of every other hi-hat, giving it a more human feel. I'll open up my kick drum row and add some swing to the entire row, say about 62. And I think I'll add some grace notes to my snare. Open up the snare row and edit the velocity of those ghost notes. And at the end of my snare pattern, I'm going to create a snare roll. So I'll add a couple of hits, double click those hits to flam them, and adjust my flam amount to pull those flams apart a bit, and finally edit some velocity on those hits. So my kick drums have some swing to them, and I want to make my snare ghost notes match that. But I don't want to add swing to the entire row because that's going to screw up the snare rolls. So I'll switch the data type over to time offset, which lets me push and pull the timing of individual steps. Now the snare's ghost notes match the swing of the kick drum. Step sequencer patterns live in the track view as clips, just like any other audio or MIDI clip. To build a larger arrangement based off this individual pattern, I'll switch over to screen set number 3. And then I'll control drag this pattern over to copy and paste it. Step sequencer patterns are linked by default, so I'll right-click on the new pattern and choose Unlink Step Sequencer Clips. I'm going to double-click this unlinked new pattern so it opens up in the step sequencer in my multi-dock, because I want to create a variation on the snare hits at the end of the pattern. Double-clicking those last 2 hits will unflam them. I'll add a new hit in, adjust the velocity. Maybe tweak the velocity just a bit more. Now I've got 2 similar patterns with different endings, so I'll lasso these 2 patterns, control drag to copy them over, turn my snap to grid back on and align that to the measure. And then select all 4 patterns, copy those over one more time, and create loop points out of the entire section, which I can do by hitting Shift-L or by using the button in the control bar. Next, I'm going to add more parts to this arrangement using track layers, so I'll double-click again on my MIDI track, right-click in the track divider to choose Show Layers, and right-click again to insert a new layer. I'll go up to my menu and choose Step Sequencer to insert a new step sequencer pattern. I'll click the plus button to insert new rows until my crash row appears, and just put a hit right on the 1, and drag the new crash clip down to the new lane. I'm going to rename this clip by opening Clip Properties in my inspector. And now I'll control copy this out every other repetition of the original base step sequencer pattern. I want to add a second crash symbol, so I'm going to insert a 3rd row. Go back to my menu and choose Step Sequencer. For this crash, I want to use the sample on note 57, so I'll use the up arrow until I reach that note. Throw this crash over the ending snare, and repeat this every 4th repetition. And since I've got clip properties open in my inspector, I'll go ahead and name these clips as well. So I've got a basic kick snare hi-hat pattern in the 1st layer, and 2 different crash patterns in the 2nd and 3rd layers. There's no limit on the number of layers you can have in a MIDI or instrument track, so you can add layers to do drum fills, tom breaks, or whatever you want. So to create a larger arrangement of this 16-bar sequence, I'm going to go up to my timeline and use timeline zoom. You can pull up and down to zoom in and out in the timeline. And use my smart tool to lasso all of the clips, and again just control drag to copy and paste these, and they'll snap to the measure because my snap to grid is set at measure. And then I'll lasso the whole thing and create a new loop point based on this selection. I've got screen set 4 set up for mixing with the console and the multi-dock on top only showing ProChannel. In the track view, I'm showing all controls so I can use my effects bin and volume and pan. Track view controls can be shown or hidden with a variety of presets, or you can make your own if you just want to see or hide particular controls, but I'm going to do some mixing, so I'll set my controls to show all. The ProChannel is built into every audio and instrument track in SONAR X1 Producer. It's a channel strip made up of a compressor, EQ, and tube saturation. There's actually two types of compressors, PC76 track compressor and the PC4K bus compressor, which you can switch between freely. There's also a 6-band EQ with different modes, and a tube saturation with two different types of saturation. And each of these modules is freely routable by drag and drop. Let's start with the kick drum and put the EQ at the front of the signal path. To start, I want to get rid of that overlapped hi-hat in the kick drum, so I'll turn my low-pass filter on, turn the slope up, and set the low pass to around 3K. Next, I'm going to add some low end to the kick. So I'll go to band 1 and set the frequency to around 60 Hz, narrow the Q just a bit, and dial in the gain. Next, I'm going to saturate the kick, so I'll move the tube saturation module in the signal path, set it to use tube sat model 1, and turn up the input gain, compensate with output gain, and adjust the drive amount. And maybe back off that just a little bit. And finally bring in the PC76 track compressor. I'll slow down that attack and release a bit, turn the input up, which is of course linked to the threshold and compression amount, compensate for that with the output gain. And I want to control the decay transients of my kick drum, so I'll go over to my browser and drag and drop in the PX64 percussion strip, turn on the transient shaper, turn down the decay transient. With my mouse over the plugin, hitting Shift-X will X-ray it, making the window transparent. So I can do an A/B by bypassing all of the project's effects, including the ProChannel. And next up is the snare drum. And like I did with the kick, I'm going to use the EQ first, putting that in the front of the signal path to filter out some of the layered hi-hat that's in the sample. But first I'll set up the high-pass filter to around 120 Hz, and go to band 4, setting it to a shelving filter, moving the frequency to around 8K, and shelve out some of that high end. I'll give this a little tube saturation as well, setting it to type 1. And finish it off with some compression, giving it a faster attack and decay because it's a snare. Crank the input up. And I want to control the decay transients of the snare as well, so I'll just control drag to copy and paste over the PX64 from the kick track to the snare track. And adjust that decay transient a bit, and use the color control to brighten the transient a tad. And do an A/B on the snare. And next up is the hi-hat. So to get started with the hi-hat, I'm going to use an effects chain. Go over to my browser, open up my effects chains list, and drag and drop one right into the effects bin of the hi-hat. An effects chain is like a preset bundle of effects which saves the routing of the effects and all of their settings. In this effects chain, I've got channel tools, which I've used to manipulate the stereo imaging. Got the PX64 percussion strip, which I'm using the transient shaper. And also alias factor, which is a really cool lo-fi effect. And I've used its bit reduction to make it sound a little darker, and you can get pretty extreme with that if you want. Effects chains are extremely versatile. They have their own effects bins. Effects can be extracted from an effects chain and placed in the track's effects bin. And from there they can be reorganized, moved, or copied over to another track. Entire effects bins can be converted into an effects chain, and then that effects chain can be saved as an effects chain preset. Once saved, it will automatically show up in the effects chains list in the plugin browser, and it's ready to drag and drop right into the project. So I like what I've got with the effects chain on my hi-hat, but I want to use the ProChannel as well. So I'll go to my console view and change the ProChannel's routing to post effects bin, and turn the EQ on, put that at the front of the signal path, and give it a relatively steep high-pass filter around 200. To give the hi-hat some instant sheen, I'll turn the gloss mode on, and bring the rest of the drums back in. Maybe turn the hi-hat volume down just a little bit. Next, I'm going to process my crash cymbals, which I have routed to my cymbals bus. So I'll click on it to bring up its ProChannel, move its EQ to the front of the signal path, give it a high-pass filter just like I did with the hi-hat, and I think I'll turn on gloss here as well. I'm also going to compress these cymbals with the PC4K bus compressor. Crank up the ratio, turn down that threshold, give it a faster attack and auto release. Now that I've got the individual components of this drum part mixed, it's time to go over to the drum bus. First thing I'll do here is add a little tube saturation to the drum bus. Switch over to type 1, crank up the input, and back off the drive just a little bit. Next, I'll EQ the drum bus and demonstrate the different EQ modes. To do this, I'll grab bands 1 and 4 and switch them to shelving filters. Set my low shelf to around 80 Hertz. Give that a little boost, and I'll grab my high shelf and give that a cut around 10K. You can hear there's a lot more low-end thud with the pure mode. Switching to vintage gives it a completely different tone. And switching to modern sounds a little bit more like pure. The reason for the different tonal characteristics is the way that the Q interacts with gain within the EQ. Finally, I'm going to compress the drum bus with the PC4K bus compressor. Give it auto release mode. Turn the threshold down. Give it some makeup gain. Here's the drums before compression and with compression. Add a little more makeup gain. And finally, the entire drum mix before the ProChannel and other effects, and with the ProChannel and other effects.